Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking today about the Ayodhya debate and particularly about the case against the temple. What that means is everybody has been looking at the case for the temple. That is to say, the arguments presented by the scholars defending the thesis that there has been a temple in Ayodhya. And they have been criticizing that and questioning that and so on. While nobody looks at the case that the opposite group of historians have made against the temple. What arguments do there exist for the thesis that there was no temple at the site? Now, I've been given a PowerPoint made by a Hindu some time ago on the basis of a dispute that took place 23 years ago between scholars mandated by the Vishwa Hindu Parishad and scholars mandated by the Babri Masjid Action Committee. Of course, a lot has happened in the meantime, so I'll update you on that. So, we know what this is about. A structure having the nature of a mosque, but used functionally as a temple, existing in Ayodhya, and supposed to stand at the birthplace of Rama. That is why it's a place of pilgrimage. Hindus go there on pilgrimage to celebrate Lord Rama. Since it is his birth temple, they especially like to go there on his birthday, which is Ram Navami, somewhere in spring. So it is claimed that this is on the exact site of the birth, but it is moreover claimed that there used to be a temple at the site which was forcibly replaced with a mosque. Muslims have historically never disputed this, but in the 80s, sometime in the late 80s, secularists gave the lead that, something more ambitious should be tried, namely denying this history. You see, the secularists could have taken the typically secular line. Okay, you see, in the past there has been some conflict between Hindus and Muslims, but let bygones be bygones. The fact that a conflict took place in the past is no reason for repeating it in the present. The fact that a temple was demolished in the past is no reason for demolishing a mosque in the present. They could have taken that line. Instead, they were so drunk on their power position that they tried something more ambitious, which was simply to deny that there had ever been a temple at the place. And so this debate really was unnecessary because a few years before, everybody was in agreement that, of course, a temple had stood at the site. After 1949, I would say even later, after 1949, this is when the idols were installed in the mosque, which was lying unused. Okay, the mosque was the object of riots in the 1930s. The British authorities closed down the place. Muslims did not try to challenge that ban, did not go there, did in fact not really care about the building. So it was lying there. In 1949, after independence, Hindus surreptitiously installed idols in the building, which was then used as a temple in a practical sense this way, that once a year a priest could go in there and worship the idols. So it was closed for the public, but a priest could go in there to conduct worship. Then in the 1980s, a court decision was made that the temple could be thrown open for general worship. So effectively it was functioning as a Hindu temple, only it had mosque architecture. And you see then, in the 80s when it was thrown open as a temple, then scholars started, or let's say academics, people with a position, people reputed to be objective, started doubting that there had ever been a temple at the site. Now in 1989, the JNU historians, Jawaharlal Nehru University, issued a famous statement challenging the historicity of the temple. And so then we really started having a debate with both sides gathering their arguments. Now, the question then became, did Babar or another Muslim ruler really demolish a Hindu temple to build the mosque in its place? If so, did it justify the right of the Hindus to correct the wrongs of history by demolishing the existing structure and rebuilding a new Rama temple? So until about 85, 86, there was a big agreement between all the parties concerned that there had been a temple at the site. Now, egged on by a few academics, the Muslim leadership started saying that there had been no temple at the site, and so the debate started. This is the JNU statement, a 6-page booklet called The Political Abuse of History, Babri Masjid Ram Janmabhoomi Dispute. Mark the word order. When I had written a manuscript called Babri Masjid Ram Janmabhoomi, a case study in Hindu-Muslim conflict in 1990, my mentor Ram Swaroop immediately took his red pen, corrected it, Ram Janmabhoomi Babri Masjid, a case study in Hindu-Muslim conflict. So the word order is somewhat important. In this case too, it is no coincidence that they have Babri Masjid as the first and Ram Janmabhoomi as the second. They are, of course, partisans of the Babri Masjid. And indeed, they believe, or at least they put forward the statement that the Babri Masjid was there earlier, and that the notion that this was the Ram Janmabhoomi, the birthplace of Rama, was concocted later. So invoking secularism, the pamphlet pleads for essentially the Babri Masjid Action Committee's position, namely that the Babri Masjid should be returned to the Muslims, that it should stop being used as a temple, and it portrayed the Hindu party as communalists, bloodshedders, not yet, but soon to be, and of course fascists. Okay, an argument says that this is not the real Ayodhya, that Ayodhya was, for instance, in Afghanistan, or in Andhra Pradesh, or in Nepal. You see, the very first bundle of evidence given by the Babri Masjid Action Committee lists as evidence 8 different articles, which of course themselves have no evidence value, but anyway, they take a position. And so they take the position that Ayodhya was in 8 different places. So, as far as I'm concerned, they could perfectly add another place, namely this historical Ayodhya. You know, there also, you know, could be the real Ayodhya. So, which of these is it? For instance, Afghanistan, the theory of Afghanistan is of course based on the Aryan invasion theory, namely that in the Vedic age, the Aryans were still in Afghanistan on their way to India, and so of course their city Ayodhya should also be there. And of course it is possible that Ayodhya was renamed by Skandargupta in the 5th century as Ayodhya. It is related in the Puranas that he found this place. Now we have several such episodes in Hindu history. For example, Vrindavan, where Krishna is supposed to have grown up. This was also not known, not located. Mathura was known, where Krishna was born, but not where he grew up. And so a great devotee of Krishna, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, traveled in the area, and when he came to a certain rural place where shepherds lived, and he roamed around there, he intuited that this must be the place where Krishna grew up. And ever since, you know, it is holy place and a place of pilgrimage and so on. So, in the case of Ayodhya, it is put forward that something similar happened, and that Skandagupta arbitrarily named a certain place Ayodhya, because the memory of Ayodhya, of course, existed. Ayodhya is, of course, the city of Rama in the Ramayana, much before Skandagupta. But so a claim is made that Skandagupta also didn't know where Ayodhya was, one of these 8 places, or another one, he didn't know which one. And so he arbitrarily named this place in Uttar Pradesh as Ayodhya. It is also said that the cult of Rama is a very recent one, that in the Middle Ages nobody would even have had a reason to celebrate Rama's birth. So certainly the place where he was born was forgotten. It is in the late Middle Ages, 13th, 14th century, that they settled there, the Ramanandi sadhus, who celebrated Ram, who had as their principal practice the repetition of the name of Ram. And the argument goes that the place before that was already known, but the Rama cult was marginal, if at all existent, and it was mainly a place for Buddhist and Jain pilgrimage. And of course they insist, they assume that Buddhism and Jainism are separate religions that have nothing to do with Hindu culture. So the so-called eminent historians, who lambast others saying they are not eminent, the eminent historians, like, you have a famous book, Eminent Victorians, and likewise you have eminent historians. So they say that the cult of Rama is recent. The place was, sacred to other religions, including Shaivism, and so it is only very recently that Rama became important. There is also no evidence that a temple was demolished before building a mosque, and it is, even doubtful that the mosque was built by Babar. It could be anyone else. Eminent historians deny certain very visible evidence. On the Babri Masjid itself used to be a plaque, I have seen it with my own eyes several times, on the entrance gate, saying that this mosque was built by Babar. Now, personally, I don't think that that is very strong evidence. And indeed, you see, even among the historians arguing that a temple had stood at a place, there is some doubt about who built the mosque. For example, the archaeologist R. Nath argues that architecturally the mosque has features which are typical for an earlier style of mosque, and that it must have been built in the 13th or 14th century. And so we don't know what exactly happened. What may have happened, for example, is exactly what has happened in our own lifetime. Namely, that during the chaos which prevailed at the end of the Delhi Sultanate, and at the time of the coming of Babar, 1526 thereabouts, that Hindus managed to own the site, to conquer the site, to acquire the site, and to use whatever building was there as a Hindu temple to celebrate Ram, and that in that sense Babar stopped the Hindu worship at the site and made it a mosque again. We don't know exactly. You see, this is science. We're doing history. Therefore, if there is something we don't know, we say clearly that we don't know it. I mean, because of politics, you see, everybody tries to be cocksure that of course there was a temple, or of course there was no temple. Well, in fact, you see, there are quite a few details of the history that we don't really know. To say that there was a major Rama temple at the site, which Babar destroyed in 1526, and this is the position taken by the Vishwa Hindu Parishad at the time, presupposes that all through the Sultanate period, from officially from 1206, but essentially starting in 1194, down to 1526, a temple could stand in the center of a town on the place of honor, on a hilltop, and serve as a center of Hindu pilgrimage, of pagan pilgrimage, all while this same town was the provincial capital of the Delhi Sultanate power structure, which was the most iconoclastic regime in history. The Delhi Sultanate started with a systematic demolition of all temples it could find in North India. And of course, very famous is the destruction of the Buddhist Nalanda University, which burned for several weeks. A huge structure, completely burned down. And not only the building was leveled, also the inmates were leveled. So the destruction of Buddhism was the handiwork precisely of the incoming Muslim invaders around 1194. Now, in that situation, when, for example, in Varanasi nearby, 1,000 temples were demolished. So the whole temple town was without any temples after that. Now, to suppose that the Ram temple in Ayodhya could have survived this onslaught is highly unlikely. So to say that there was a temple built in like the 11th century which survived this Muslim regime and was still on the spot when Babar came there in 1526 is very unlikely. You see, more likely there was an Islamic structure at the site. Babar may or may not have destroyed it. He has, of course, destroyed many temples. We know he was a temple destroyer. So if he found any kind of Hindu presence at the site, he may have removed that. But we don't know exactly what happened. But Muslims themselves, at any rate, claim that the mosque was built by Babar. And that is what is consecrated in these inscriptions. Then this is also about the question who exactly built it. So this question really is not so important. You see, what Muslim ruler built it? Was it Babar or his lieutenant Mir Baqi, or was it any other Muslim ruler? Shah Suran Ghori, for example, in 1194. Well, this is all possible, but this is really immaterial to the fundamental case, namely, there was an Islamic theology of temple destruction, and that was applied in India, and it was specifically applied in Ayodhya. And that definitely happened. About that, there is no doubt. About which Muslim exactly it was, okay, there we can have a debate. Then you see the pamphlet further says that there was a history of Hindu harmony and peaceful coexistence. Well, we know that that was glaringly not the case. That Muslims never broke Hindu temples, well, there are thousands of counter-proofs. That it was not due to their religious fervor has been argued. I think it is not true. I think it is demonstrably untrue. But anyway, in this debate it's not so important. The fact that they demolished it, that at any rate has been established. The motives, of course, we can discuss, but it is less important. Then it is said that alternatively, okay, yeah, here or there they may have demolished the temple, but then that was justified, or at least understandable, because the greedy Hindus tended to hoard their money in temples. That's also why the present secular government, wants to own the revenue of temples, not of mosques or churches, because of these evil, corrupt Hindus who have to be kept on a tight leash. So it is justified to loot Hindu temples. Then it is said that it is not allowed in Islam to pray on a land grabbed or illegitimately acquired. This is said not only by the secular historians, this is also and emphatically said by the Vishwa Hindu Parishad. And it is not true. No matter who says it, it is clearly not true. It is indeed not allowed in Islam to pray on a land grabbed or illegitimately acquired from another Muslim. If you steal land and build a mosque on it, then God will not hear your prayers. But stealing a temple from pagans and demolishing the temple and building a mosque on it is natural Muslim practice. You see, the principal mosque of Islam, the Kaaba, originated precisely in this way. It had 360 idols. Muhammad personally, with his own hands, destroyed them and turned the place into a mosque. And that, of course, is the precedent for all the cases of temple demolition afterwards. So it is very much allowed in Islam. And destroying a place of pilgrimage of the Indian pagans in Ayodhya would be a perfect application of the precedent set by the Prophet. So if the land of the Babri Masjid was grabbed from Hindus, then no one should ever offer namaz there, Islamic prayer. So this has also been argued by the Hindus, that we are not really stealing a mosque, because this mosque, not only ever since it was used as a Hindu temple, but even before, when Muslims prayed there, well, those prayers were ineffective. Because, of an imaginary Islamic doctrine that you should not grab land from someone else and build a mosque on it. Then, many secular historians have maintained that this was a British concoction. You see, it is said that the British had a policy of divide and rule, and that therefore they invented the story of the Ram Janmabhoomi stolen by the Muslims to build the Babri Masjid on it. Now, a few things don't sound right here. The British had a certain policy of divide and rule at the negotiation table. Rather than finding in front of them a united National Indian Congress, they like to see the Muslim League and the Maharajas and Dr. Ambedkar, and they like to see a whole field of divided interests. But that was at the negotiation table. They, of course, did not want communal riots in the streets. They wanted India to make money, and therefore, it needed to be peaceful, and therefore they did not want any quarrels between Hindus and Muslims on the streets. But suppose that they did want to divide and rule on the streets, then why would they have to invent the temple destruction scenario in Ayodhya, when they had thousands of really existing, attested cases of temple destruction throughout India? For example, to name a similarly holy place, the Kashi Vishwanath temple in Varanasi. As you know, it was rebuilt by the Hindus under Akbar, and then it was again destroyed by Aurangzeb, who built a mosque on the site. Now you can go and see that mosque for yourself. It still has the walls of the original Hindu temple incorporated, and purposely so, because they wanted to demonstrate the victory of Islam over Hinduism. So they could have showcased that one, for example, and it's an important sacred place. It could perfectly serve their purposes. So they had absolutely no need of inventing this Ram Janmabhoomi story. And anyway, you see, this is one of the many inventions of the secularists for which there is no proof at all. You see, if they had found a British document suggesting this concoction scenario, then perhaps, you see, they could have, thought further and extrapolated from this and made sense of this story. But, they did not have it, they just made that hypothesis without any evidence whatsoever, just because it was useful to their purpose. This type of argument, of course, goes down well in India, because there are very many people who like to blame it on the British. Anything. This started with Mahatma Gandhi, with the freedom movement and its divide and rule story. And it still operates like the many Hindus who believe that the partition was concocted and foisted upon both Hindus and Muslims by the wily, evil British. This is absolutely untrue. This is very easy to refute, and yet 99% of the Indians believe it. So he demanded non-British proof before the 19th century. So Harsh Narayan, a historian who died very shortly after this debate, in I believe 1991, came up with a number of Muslim proofs dating from before the 19th century. For example, he claimed that it was widely believed, not only among Hindus but also among Muslims, that the mosques built by the invaders stand on the land grabbed or extorted from the Kafirs, the pagans, that is, in this case the Hindus. So he refuted the doctrine that no mosque can be built on land illegitimately grabbed, that is only applicable to Muslims but not to Hindus. And so you see all similar laws in Islam clearly distinguish between fellow Muslims and pagans. Fellow Muslims have many more rights than pagans. All land belongs to the Muslims, as Ibn Taymiyyah, the Islamic theologian, said. If Muslims grab land from the pagans, they only restore land to themselves which God really has meant for them. So it's really justice. Okay, so he presents a number of documents written by Muslims, including one Muslim who, in just after the war of just before the War of Independence, or the Indian Mutiny of 1857, participated in Hindu-Muslim riots in Ayodhya, precisely over the Ayodhya temple or mosque at the time. So this Ali Kakoravi, and this is not mentioned here in the PowerPoint, but anyway, he says that, you see, the prehistory of these riots is that the building, which was then a mosque, was built at the site of a Hindu temple. Rector of the Nadwatul Ulama, which is one of the important Islamic educational institutions, testifies the same about the Ram Janmabhoomi. So on its place, where there used to be a temple, Babar constructed the mosque. So again, you see, Muslims believe it was Babar. You know, there may be dispute about who exactly did it, but at any rate, it was a Muslim ruler. Now, another evidence is by a non-Muslim, Abhas Chatterjee, who visited India in the 18th century. Now, this is clearly pre-British, and he visited Ayodhya and described how Hindus kept coming to the mosque in spite of it being a mosque, try to get as close to it as possible to celebrate Rama's birthday. And they came especially on Ram Navami from all over India to celebrate this festival. So you see here that it's not the temple that is important, the building on it, but the place itself. It's the place itself that was venerated. The place itself was important, hallowed by the birth of Ram. And, you know, you could build a beautiful Rama temple anywhere else, but it would not be the birthplace temple, because the birthplace was there. Then there's other evidence not given by Harsh Narayan, which is that two old giant sources refer to the city of Ayodhya as very much in existence and as containing a number of giant temples, some of which still exist, or giant temples that were giant temples but have been replaced with mosques. But at any rate, giants have a memory of this site. Then you have Vikramaditya, but that may be this Skandagupta. I mean, there are several Vikramadityas. That's always a problem in Indian history. Who chose it as the prime city of India and as the birthplace of Sri Rama. So this, according to the secularists, proves that he just invented it, when in fact, you see, he may have his reasons for choosing this site. But the real issue is not about, is this really the birthplace of Rama? For example, the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem is chosen based on the belief that Muhammad went there on a winged horse on a journey through heaven. Now, many of us will say that this is absolute nonsense, that this cannot be true. Yet, Muslims believe it and practically apply it in venerating a mosque built on that site. Do the secular historians want to challenge the right of Muslims to worship at the Al-Aqsa site in Jerusalem? Well, they should. You see, if they want to challenge Ayodhya, let them first challenge the Al-Aqsa site in Jerusalem. Let them say clearly, okay, we have no business in Israel, Palestine, but as a matter of principle, let us say it clearly, we object not only to Hindus in Ayodhya, we object also to a Muslim mosque in Jerusalem, because it is not rational, it is superstitious, you see, it's not historical. All the arguments which they have used against Hindus in Ayodhya, they can perfectly use against Muslims in Jerusalem. So do we accept the historicity of Rama, his birth at the site and so on? In that case, do we accept the winged horse story or not? Okay, we go on. Babar, of course, got many temples mutilated, giant temples, for instance. You see here the secularists say, but he didn't do it because he was against giants or so, but because he was against nudity. And Mahavira, Jina, is always depicted nude. Well, you see, that is a poor excuse, Most gods and goddesses are depicted fully dressed, and their temples were equally demolished. Why did Babar break temples? Well, because the Quran tells him so. In this case, he was also wearing the title Ghazi, which means someone who has killed pagans with his own hands. Those reasons. And then he describes himself in his autobiography that he destroyed temples. Unfortunately, a part of his autobiography was lost in a storm, and this includes the part about his visit to Ayodhya. So we do not have his own description of what exactly happened in Ayodhya, unfortunately. And so this happens both ways, we just don't have the evidence. Yes, of course, in the area, many places were destroyed by Muhammad Ghori, in 1192, 1194. That is why I say, you see, the Rama temple must have been among them. I think this is so obvious that I wonder why the VHP has not come around to this view. They deemed it politically more useful to blame Babar, but Babar came late in the day. These are some of the mosques that Babar built in replacement of Hindu temples. As for the archaeological evidence, so then already archaeologists had found a number of pillar bases that would have supported a large structure. Of course, the structure itself is gone. Strictly speaking, we are not sure it was a temple, though by location it probably was. A few statues were also found, but in your own homes, you'll probably also have statues of Hindu gods or pictures or whatever, so that is strictly speaking not proof. But the pillars followed the ground plan typical of a Hindu temple, so that's also relevant. And in the meantime, in 2003, a full excavation has been conducted on the site, court mandated. So the Allahabad High Court mandated the Archaeological Survey of India. A full excavation was conducted, and of course, the full basis of a large temple structure was found. Now, anything can have been built on top of that, foundation, and so it is possible, as Irfan Habib, for example, among the secularist historians has said, that in the 13th, 14th, 15th century, there was a mosque on the site. You see, that is perfectly possible, but that makes no difference. That mosque, as well as any mosque built by Babar, was built on the foundations of a Hindu temple. So again, you see it was a common practice to destroy temples and to incorporate their materials in the mosque that followed. The same thing happened indeed in the Babri Masjid, where the pillars of a Hindu temple were incorporated in the mosque structure. A continual show of Muslim victory over idolatry. This case follows the general pattern that temples were built in high places. So in this case also in the place of honor in Ayodhya. Then we have more testimonies. Here we have more testimony. This is very important. The Encyclopedia Britannica. This is of course hardly a contemporary source, but at least it's a very scientific source. And it said casually, offhand, in 1989, when in India this debate raged, Rama's birthplace is marked by a mosque erected by the Mughal Emperor Babar in 1528 on the site of an earlier temple. There you have it. Of course, the latest edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica does not say this, because after Hindu and other historians had quoted this, it's obvious that secularists went to the Encyclopedia Britannica authors and protested and had their own version put in the Encyclopedia Britannica, saying that this is scientific and the other is superstitious. And Hindus did not counter that. They were sleepwalking or something. I don't know what they did, but at least you see, the other side, while their case was perfectly fraudulent, managed to make the most of it. Whereas the Hindus had a very good case since the beginning, and well, what can I say? You see, they covered themselves with a very bad name, demolition and so on, which worldwide is decried as a show of fanaticism and so on, which gave Hindus a very bad press, which has given Hinduism a much worse name than it used to have. I mean, there are these Hindu websites where they proudly quote all the Westerners who have praised Hinduism, but they don't notice that these Westerners wrote 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and that you cannot find any present-day Westerners who say the same thing. Because you see, they have all been informed by the New York Times, by The Economist and so on, that Hindus are evil and fanatical, oppressing the Muslims, and so Hindus have not found a way to counter that propaganda. The blood of the infidels flowed copiously. Conversion was the only way of survival, because those who did not convert were killed. Yes, you see, of course we know all this history. Only the secularists don't know it. Amir Khusrau testified in the same sense. Will Durant, a historian, calls the Muslim conquest of India probably the bloodiest story in history, a discouraging tale, for its evident moral is that civilization is a precious thing, a delicate complex of order and liberty, culture and peace, that may at any time be overthrown by barbarians invading from without, or indeed multiplying within. And this all follows the example of the Prophet, who did the same thing in Mecca, and thereby set the precedent for all the later temple destructions. This is sanctioned in the Quran also. Okay, so this is the historical evidence. Coming to the solution, the Babri Masjid Action Committee, as well as many so-called secularists, reject a real solution, and certainly a peaceful, harmonious solution that will satisfy everyone. They instead want the imposition of the Muslim will on the Hindus, namely the giving back of the site to the Muslims and its use as a mosque. Then why the myth of somehow a mosque standing there since creation that never ever was a Hindu site has come to be? Well, you see the secularists believing the worn out old slogan, secularism in danger. You see, before partition they used to say, Islam in danger. So now this has become secularism in danger. So the secularists were really getting worked up and hysterical and saying secularism in danger. And so they saw the Babri Masjid as the last bulwark of secularism. Of course, Babar and Muhammad would, turn over in their graves, seeing that their own mosque, you see, a very big slap in the face of secularism, was now hailed as, a symbol of secularism. And so you see, this last bulwark of secularism was being threatened by evil fanatical Hindus and had to be defended by the Indian state. Now, this way, academics, then also institutions obeying the academics, and especially the media, have created a frenzy in which it became impossible for practical historians to solve this controversy. You see, Rajiv Gandhi in the 1980s was working towards a peaceful solution. He saw the courts amending awarding to Hindus the right of free, unimpeded access to the site. So it was becoming more and more Hindu. Effectively it was already a Ram Janmabhoomi temple, only architecturally it was still a mosque. So he thought, okay, you see, let Hindus have this temple and we will appease Muslims. You see, we will make them swallow this pill by giving them some soaps, like for instance the banning of Salman Rushdie's book, The Satanic Verses, or for instance Shah Bano case where the divorce law was brought in line with the Sharia. So this was practical politics. It's not very noble. It is called horse trading. It is Congress culture. But you see, it has the redeeming feature of not causing any bloodshed. So this could have worked, and the reason why it has not been tried, not been tried till the end, has not been worked out, is because the secularists had created an atmosphere, a very shrill, extreme atmosphere, in which these practical politics became impossible. So the secularists really have blood on their hands. But being cowards, of course, they have managed to let others do the bloodshed. So this debate was artificial and unnecessary. It is perfectly normal that a Hindu place of pilgrimage, where numerous Hindus have gone on pilgrimage even when a mosque was standing there, even under Muslim rule, as Father Tiefenthaler has testified, that such a place where they still go on pilgrimage and where no Muslim ever goes on pilgrimage, that this place is given to the Hindus. This is perfectly natural. Any secularist regime in the world would do so. For example, in France, you've heard about Lourdes, a place of pilgrimage sacred to or consecrated to the Virgin Mary. Now, the French government at the time, and especially during the so-called Third Republic, 1871 till 1940, was militantly secularist, did not believe anything about these Catholic superstitions, laughed at what happened in Lourdes. Nevertheless, it protected Lourdes, it allowed people to come to pilgrimage in Lourdes. It did not think of taking away Lourdes from the Catholics and building some other secular or mosque or so building on it. So it is perfectly natural for a secular government to, respect these religious customs. So in this case, of course, they should have awarded this place to the Hindus. And it is only the secularists that made this impossible. So it is a perfectly artificial and unnecessary debate. It should not have been there in the first place. Yes, well, the fundamental solution is that all Indians come to their senses and abandon superstitions like Islam and, merge in the general population, and they will automatically bring back their mosques with them. And they can become temples or anything that the people concerned themselves decide. So this is the fundamental solution. Now, as long as this division in different religions continues, I would not make too much of a fuss about it. Temples are not that important. In fact, Hinduism has very long existed without temples. The Vedic rishis did not have any temples. They worshipped in the open air, just like the tribals still do. So temples are not so important. In the case of Mathura and Kashi, there perhaps, you know, and there we know for sure that these were Hindu sacred sites. I mean, there is no dispute, and it is impossible to create such an artificial and unnecessary dispute. There we know, you see, these are Hindu sacred places. There a case could be made for returning them to the Hindus. You know, let that, you know, remain in the balance. Let that be disputed, okay? Whether to make an issue out of it or not. I guess after Ayodhya, Hindus have a bit lost the taste for this kind of dispute. That is also true. The others are definitely, you know, there we should wait for Muslims to come to their senses. Yes, I mean, I know of places in Spain where Christians reconquered it, you see, and where churches turned into mosques were again turned into churches. Like you have the Mezquita in Cordova, where there was originally a Roman pagan temple, which became a Christian church. Then the church was demolished to make way for a newly built mosque, which is the Mezquita. And you know, it's a beautiful building, no doubt. And then that mosque was left standing, but was turned into a church, which it still is today. But you see, as for places where Muslims themselves delivered themselves from Islam, you see, that is the case. That was the case in Turkey under Atatürk. What happened was not so much that the churches were returned to the church. What happened in the case of the Hagia Sophia, the Sacred Wisdom Church. So you see, this was the biggest church of Christianity. That had been turned into a mosque in 1453, and so Atatürk turned it into a museum. So the building was left standing, everybody could go in, could come and watch it. It was no longer a mosque and it was no longer a church. As you know, present day Turkish Muslims are pressing for restoring the building as a mosque. But I do not know of any example where a mosque was turned into a pagan temple again. Not offhand. Thank you.